Beneath deserts, mountains, and oceans lie the ghostly highways that built empires. Routes so vital, they rewrote history. But some paths were never mapped, and their secrets are still buried in the silence. In the shifting sands of Central Asia, a network of ancient paths once carried more than just silk. It moved ideas, inventions, and empires. The Silk Road wasn't a single road, but an intricate web stretching over 7,000 kilometers, from the markets of Xi'an in China, across the Taklamakan Desert, through the soaring Pamir Mountains, and into the heart of the Roman Empire. Long before modern borders, traders, monks, and emissaries crossed this terrain, bearing lacquerware, gold, spices, glass, and knowledge. Along these routes, Buddhism flowed into China, papermaking reached the West, and medical texts traveled farther than armies ever could. Entire cities, like Samarkand and Merv, rose and fell as nodes of commerce and culture. Yet, while the goods are catalogued and the ruins excavated, some questions remain uncharted. Why did certain technologies vanish after reaching their destination? How did cultures separated by thousands of miles develop similar artistic motifs before any confirmed contact? And perhaps most curious, were there undocumented parallel routes, hidden arteries, lost to history beneath the deserts and mountains? Even today, satellites detect traces of ancient tracks buried beneath the Gobi sands, whispered paths that never made it into official records, forgotten outposts, vanished traders, silent witnesses to one of humanity's grandest exchanges. The Silk Road is often seen as a bridge between worlds, but perhaps parts of that bridge have yet to be found. Long before gold held sway, a warm, golden resin captured the imagination of ancient Europe, glowing, mysterious, and coveted, amber. The Amber Road was not a single trail, but a shifting corridor that stretched from the windswept shores of the Baltic Sea to the sunlit plazas of the Mediterranean. For millennia, raw amber, fossilized tree resin from prehistoric forests, was carried by foot, cart, and shipped through dense forests, mountain passes, and tribal borders. To the Romans, it was more valuable than a slave. To the Greeks, a substance with mystical properties. Traders navigated from present-day Lithuania and Poland, through Bohemia, across the Danube, and down into Italy and Greece. Archaeological finds, amber beads in Mycenaean tombs, Roman coins deep in the north, suggest a trade far more expansive than official records reveal. Alongside the amber, ideas and technologies passed silently. Metalwork, burial rites, even early writing systems. Yet much of this route remains elusive. Why do certain segments appear and vanish from the archaeological map? Why were vast deposits of amber untouched, while remote regions saw regular exchange? And how did this precious material influence ritual practices and political alliances far from its source? Beneath today's highways and farmland, fragments of this ancient commerce still surface. Beads, carvings, and the occasional wagon will lost to time. The Amber Road was more than a trade route. It was a glowing thread through the fabric of prehistoric Europe, and parts of that thread may still be buried beneath our feet. Across barren deserts and sun-bleached cliffs, a scent once traveled farther than any army. Frankincense and myrrh, carried by caravans through the heart of Arabia. The incense trade route, active for over 1,000 years, stretched from the verdant valleys of southern Arabia, modern-day Yemen and Oman, through the hostile Rub al-Khali Desert, up into Petra, Gaza, and the Mediterranean world. It was a lifeline of luxury, connecting the empires of Rome, Persia, and India to the sacred temples of Egypt and Babylon. Caravans of up to 2,000 camels crossed this trail, bearing not just incense, but gold, ivory, silk, and rare spices. Along the way rose cities like Shabwa, Marib, and Nadran, fortified oasis hubs that thrived on the profits of the sacred smoke. Temples and altars demanded a constant supply. Kings paid in silver, and at times wars were fought not for territory but for trees. Yet much of the route remains a mystery. Sections have vanished beneath modern cities or been swallowed by the desert. Some ancient way stations appear only in inscriptions or fragmented oral histories. Why did the route suddenly decline in the 3rd century? Was it the rise of seaborne trade, or something more complex? Archaeologists still search for lost branches of this route, hidden beneath dunes or etched into remote cliffside graffiti. The air no longer carries the scent of sacred resin, but the trail remains, faint, silent, and waiting to be rediscovered. Long before the age of exploration, a powerful current moved across oceans and continents, not of water, but of flavor, scent, and silent influence. The spice route was a vast and complex web of maritime and overland paths that connected the fabled spice islands of Southeast Asia to India, Arabia, Africa, and ultimately Europe, from cloves and nutmeg in the Moluccas to cinnamon in Sri Lanka and pepper from the Malabar coast. These were more than ingredients. They were treasures, believed to cure disease, preserve life, and ward off evil. Sailing with the rhythm of the monsoon winds, Arab and Indian merchants navigated the Indian Ocean long before European maps even named its shores. Ports like Calicut, Muscat, Aden, and Alexandria became glittering hubs of commerce and culture. Spices flowed westward, while gold, silver, glass, and textiles traveled east. But for all its recorded wealth, the full extent of the spice route remains hazy. Were there secret harbors known only to a few families? Why do some regions show evidence of foreign spices centuries before known trade contact? And how did isolated inland communities gain access to ingredients found only on distant islands? Shipwrecks still line the seabed from Java to Zanzibar, silent vaults of cargo and forgotten routes. The spice route fed empires, shaped diets, and shifted global power. Yet parts of it remain uncharted, like the missing notes of a forgotten recipe waiting to be tasted again. Across one of the most unforgiving landscapes on Earth, long lines of camels once carved invisible highways into the sand, linking worlds divided by desert. The trans-Saharan trade routes connected sub-Saharan Africa to the Mediterranean and beyond, centuries before European ships ever reached the continent's shores. From the 4th to the 17th century, gold, salt, ivory, slaves, and manuscripts flowed north and south across the Sahara, carried by caravans that could stretch for miles. Timbuktu, Gao, and Jen became centers of knowledge and wealth, while northern cities like Tripoli and Marrakesh prospered as desert gateways. Salt was worth its weight in gold, and gold, gleaming from the rivers of West Africa, fueled empires like Ghana, Mali, and Songhai, echoing far beyond the dunes. Yet these ancient paths were not fixed. Sandstorms erased roads. Tribes guarded routes with fierce secrecy. And much of the trade was oral, unwritten, undocumented, and passed from memory to memory. Archaeological traces are scarce, often no more than pottery shards, worn coins, or the crumbled remains of way stations. How many routes remain undiscovered beneath the Saharan sands? What towns flourished and vanished without ever entering the historical record? And what knowledge, carried in scrolls not gold, was lost to time? The desert forgets, but it also preserves. And somewhere beneath the silence of the dunes, the echoes of trade, empire, and unseen connections still linger. Through the searing winds of the Nubian desert, a road of silence and survival once stretched for over 1,600 kilometers, known to history as Darb el-Arbiyun, the Way of 40 Days. This ancient trade route linked the fertile Nile Valley of Egypt to the distant kingdoms of Darfur and beyond. For centuries, it served as a vital artery for the movement of gold, ivory, slaves, ostrich feathers, and even sacred gum Arabic. Caravans, some with thousands of camels, took 40 days to cross its sun-scorched path, braving thirst, raiders, and the endless expanse of shifting sand. More than just a line across the desert, Darb el-Arbiyun connected cultures. From the oases of Kurga and Selima to the frontier fortresses of medieval Egypt, it supported not only commerce, but diplomacy, pilgrimage, and migration. ancient wells and lost way stations still dot its length, some reduced to rubble, others buried entirely. Yet, its full story remains incomplete. How were these caravans organized with such precision across inhospitable terrain? Who maintained the desert wells that appear in no surviving maps? And why did this once critical route slowly fade into obscurity, even before the rise of European sea power? The sands have covered much, but not all. Satellite imagery, oral histories, and buried fragments suggest that Darb el Arbuin still holds secrets. And somewhere beneath that ancient desert sky, the trail waits, whispering the footsteps of those who dared to cross it. Long before the rise of modern empires, a vast ocean linked distant shores, not by conquest, but by wind, tide, and trade. The Indian Ocean Trade Network was one of the most extensive and enduring maritime systems in human history. Stretching from the ports of East Africa to the spice-laden islands of Southeast Asia, it connected Arabia, India, Persia, China, and dozens of cultures in between. For over 1,500 years, it moved not just goods, like silk, porcelain, cloves, ivory, and gold, but also languages, beliefs, and ideas. Unlike the Atlantic or Mediterranean, this was a network shaped by the rhythm of the monsoon. Traders timed their voyages to the shifting winds, creating a reliable seasonal circuit. Swahili coastal cities like Kilwa and Mombasa became cosmopolitan hubs, while ports like Calicut, Muscat, and Malacca flourished with wealth and cultural exchange. And yet, for a network so vast, much remains hidden. Archaeological discoveries of East African tombs containing Chinese ceramics or Indian inscriptions found deep in Southeast Asia raise questions about undocumented voyages and forgotten connections. How far did these sailors really travel? What maps did they use, if any? And were there earlier, pre-recorded cycles of trade that left no written trace? Shipwrecks lie scattered along coral coasts and muddy seabeds, frozen chapters of this maritime story still unread. The Indian Ocean Trade Network was not bound by empire, but by knowledge of wind and sea, and its full depth may still be submerged beneath the waves. Carved through mountains, deserts, and vast imperial lands, the royal road of the Persian Empire was more than stone and dust. It was the pulse of an empire. Built under the rule of Darius I in the 5th century BCE, the royal road stretched nearly 2,700 kilometers from Sardis in Anatolia to Susa, the Achaemenid capital in Persia. It allowed messages to travel in mere days what would otherwise take months, a feat so advanced that even Herodotus remarked on its unmatched speed. Relay stations and waypoints lined the route. Mounted couriers rode day and night, changing horses at intervals, ensuring the empire's commands and intelligence flowed without interruption. Goods, armies, and ideas moved just as swiftly. From gold-laden caravans to diplomatic envoys, this road was a marvel of infrastructure and imperial control. But questions remain. Did an older network exist beneath Darius's road, repurposed from forgotten kingdoms? Were certain segments, now lost, once crucial to ancient trade long before Persia rose? And how did this arterial highway influence later empires, whose own roads mimic its precision? Archaeologists continue to find stone foundations, buried milestones, and crumbled rest houses, fragments of a system that once connected east and west. The royal road was a triumph of logistics and vision. And though empires fall, some roads never fully vanish. Where desert meets sea, and empires once collided, a narrow corridor carried armies, pilgrims, and traders through the cradle of civilization. Known to historians as the Via Maris, Latin for Way of the Sea, this ancient route hugged the eastern Mediterranean coast, linking Egypt to Syria, Mesopotamia, and beyond. It passed through modern-day Gaza, Ashkelon, Jaffa, and Megiddo, threading between the Sinai and the sea, where fertile land gave way to stone and sand. This was not merely a trade route. It was a political artery used by pharaohs, Assyrian kings, and later Roman generals. Incense, spices, gold, and textiles moved north and south, but so did conquest and culture. Cities along the route became strategic prizes, fortified, destroyed, and rebuilt again. Yet, much about the Via Maris remains uncertain. The name itself never appears in ancient texts, only in much later Roman and biblical references. Scholars still debate whether it was a single road or a cluster of paths shifting with the needs of travelers and rulers. Recent excavations have uncovered segments of paved roadways and caravanserai, but gaps persist, sections lost to time, erosion, or modern development. And then there are the mysteries of its spiritual cargo, ancient religious symbols, deities, and myths that seem to have flowed along this coastal line, influencing temples from Egypt to Canaan. The Via Maris was a lifeline through contested land, connecting not just cities, but civilizations. And perhaps, beneath modern highways and quiet hills, its footsteps still echo in stone. Winding through mountains, deserts, and sacred lands, the King's Highway is one of the oldest continuously used trade routes in human history. Its stones walked by kings, prophets, and caravans alike, running from Egypt across the Sinai Peninsula, through Jordan, and into Damascus. The King's Highway served as a vital artery for ancient empires. It linked the Red Sea to the heart of Mesopotamia, passing through Edom, Moab, Ammon, and the highlands east of the Jordan River. Along this road, incense, spices, wheat, and wine flowed north and south, connecting cultures and capitals for over 3 millennia. Mentioned in both Egyptian records and the Hebrew Bible, the King's Highway was also a road of tension. Biblical texts describe Israelite tribes denied passage, while later empires fought for control of its strategic cities, Kerak, Medaba, and Basra among them. But even today, many questions remain buried beneath the surface. How much of the route we know today aligns with its ancient path? What settlements once dotted the roadside but vanished without record? And what knowledge was carried alongside goods, lost languages, forgotten beliefs, or even early science passed from traveler to traveler? Traces of Roman paving still survive in parts of Jordan. Ruins of inns and fortresses suggest a route far more sophisticated than simple desert trails. The King's Highway was more than a road. It was a corridor of empire, pilgrimage, and mystery, and parts of its story still lie hidden in the dust it once bore. In ancient Egyptian texts, it was called Ta-Netjer, the land of the gods. But where exactly was Punt? And how did the Egyptians reach it? The land of Punt was a mysterious and wealthy region, known from inscriptions dating back to Egypt's 5th dynasty. Pharaohs sent expeditions to trade for gold, myrrh, ebony, exotic animals, and incense trees, luxuries so prized they were depicted in temple reliefs with reverence. The most famous of these voyages occurred under Queen Hatshepsut, whose mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari still displays vivid scenes of ships arriving at a lush, foreign shore. But despite this detailed art, the location of Punt remains uncertain. Was it in modern-day Eritrea, Somalia, Yemen, or perhaps even deeper inland? The trade route itself is just as enigmatic. Egyptian ships likely sailed down the Red Sea, navigating treacherous coastlines and monsoon winds. Some theories suggest overland caravan legs may have connected Nile ports to the Red Sea, while others propose a direct maritime route with stopovers at now-buried harbors. No definitive map, no Puntite port, and no known wrecks have ever confirmed the exact path. Artifacts found in Egypt, like baboons traced isotopically to Eritrea, offer tantalizing clues. But still, the road to Punt is paved more with questions than answers. The land of Punt was real. Its riches filled Egyptian temples. Its trees were replanted in foreign soil. But its map has yet to be redrawn. Deep in the tropical heart of the Malay Peninsula lies a narrow strip of land, barely 400 meters wide, that once bridged 2 oceans and linked empires. It is known as the Laluan Panarakan, the portage route. Long before the Strait of Malacca became a global trade hub, Malay traders discovered a shortcut. By hauling their boats overland between the Muar and Pahang rivers, they could bypass treacherous coastal waters and piracy-prone straits. Using manpower, logs, and ancient knowledge of the tides, vessels were dragged across this slim land divide, creating one of Southeast Asia's most ingenious and least understood trade routes. The Panarakan connected the west and east coasts of the Malay Peninsula, facilitating the movement of spices, tin, forest products, and foreign goods between India, China, and the Indonesian archipelago. Local kingdoms grew wealthy from the tolls and services offered along the path, and legends of the portage were passed down for centuries. But its full story remains shrouded. No formal maps from its prime exist. How was this route maintained? Who controlled it, and how far back does its use truly go? Some oral traditions suggest it may date to the Srivijaya period or earlier, while archaeological evidence remains scarce and scattered. Today, much of the land is overgrown. But hidden beneath the roots and rivers may lie traces of tracks, timber, and forgotten efforts. The Laluan Panarakan was more than a shortcut. It was a strategic lifeline across a continent. And its silent path still cuts through history like a seam waiting to be uncovered. Across sapphire seas and storm-bound straits, a silent route once connected the great civilizations of East and West, not by land, but by wave and wind. The Maritime Silk Road was a vast network of sea routes that carried silk, porcelain, spices, and ideas from China to Southeast Asia, India, Arabia, and as far as the shores of East Africa and the Mediterranean. Unlike the overland Silk Road, this oceanic highway followed the rhythm of the monsoon winds, rising and falling with the seasons, guiding merchant fleets across thousands of miles. Chinese ports like Guangzhou and Quanzhou thrived as gateways to the wider world. Indian ports such as Calicut and Sri Lanka's ancient harbors served as vital junctions. Arab dhows, Chinese junks, and Malay ships all sailed these waters, bringing with them not just cargo, but stories, languages, and beliefs. And yet, much of this maritime web remains submerged in mystery. Shipwrecks discovered off the coasts of Indonesia, Vietnam, and Kenya reveal cargoes of unimaginable scale, some dating centuries earlier than expected. How far did Chinese influence truly spread by sea? What undocumented ports once flourished along forgotten coasts? And what routes have vanished beneath rising seas and silting harbors? The Maritime Silk Road was not a single path. It was a living network, fluid and adaptive, shaped by the ocean's pulse. And though the sails have long vanished from the horizon, the currents of this ancient trade still whisper across the waves, waiting to be mapped anew. Before silk became a symbol of empire, there was another material cool to the touch, impossible to break, and believed to hold the essence of heaven: jade. The Jade Road is one of the oldest known trade networks in East Asia, predating even the Silk Road. Stretching from the rugged jade mines of Khotan in the Kunlun Mountains across the Taklamakan Desert to ancient Chinese capitals like Anyang and Xi'an, this prehistoric route moved not just stone, but sacred power. For the early Chinese dynasties, jade wasn't merely ornamental. It was used in royal burials, ritual tools, and symbolic artifacts thought to connect the earthly and the divine. But Khotan nephrite, the highest quality jade, lay far beyond China's borders, across some of the harshest terrain on Earth. How, then, did this prized material make its way across deserts, gorges, and shifting political boundaries? Who were the traders, artisans, and intermediaries who bridged those worlds? And how far back does this trade really go? Archaeologists have found jade pieces in Neolithic tombs, far older than the formal records of any known trade route. Some pieces traveled over 2,000 kilometers, carved with symbols whose meanings are still debated. And while jade would one day be replaced by silk in global commerce, its legacy remains etched in stone, quiet, enduring, and enigmatic. The Jade Road was never just about trade. It was about belief, legacy, and the silent exchange between earth and eternity. Beneath the scorching sun and across kingdoms lost to time, one path shimmered with promise: the Golden Road, a name whispered in the histories of wealth, conquest, and the pursuit of the divine metal. The Golden Road refers not to a single documented route, but to a network of ancient trade paths that funneled gold across Africa, Arabia, and Eurasia. from the gold-rich lands of Nubia and West Africa to the treasuries of Egypt, Persia, and Rome. This flow of gold shaped empires, funded wars, and adorned temples. In the east, gold from the Altai Mountains and Central Asia traveled across the steppes into China and India. In the west, Saharan caravans transported West African gold through cities like Timbuktu and Gao, eventually reaching the Mediterranean via trans-Saharan trails. Nubian mines, worked by forgotten hands, once fed the vaults of pharaohs. Yet despite its glow in history, the path of gold is often obscured. Where were the lost mines mentioned in Egyptian inscriptions? What routes carried West African gold before camel caravans? And how much of the world's ancient gold, now melted, reshaped, or buried, ever reached its final destination? Archaeological traces, gold dust in ancient furnaces, forgotten coin molds, broken jewelry, offer glimpses of a trade as elusive as it is enduring. The Golden Road was not paved, nor fixed. It was forged again and again through ambition, secrecy, and desire. And in its wake, it left kingdoms and mysteries still gleaming beneath the soil. Along the narrow strip where the desert kisses the Mediterranean, an ancient path once carried prophets, armies, and caravans through the crossroads of history. Known in later texts as the Way of the Sea, this coastal route helped shape the destiny of nations. Referenced in biblical writings and Roman records, the Way of the Sea likely refers to a segment of the larger Via Maris, a trade and military corridor that stretched from Egypt through Canaan and into Syria and Mesopotamia. It was the lifeline between Africa and Asia, threading through Gaza, Jaffa, and Megiddo, where fertile plains met fortified cities. On this path, Egyptian pharaohs marched to war. Canaanite merchants traded cedar, copper, and glass. And, according to scripture, this was the route taken by empires that would rise and fall over centuries of conflict and commerce. Yet much of its true form remains veiled. Where precisely did this sea road run? Was it a single path or a braided network of shifting trails, adapting with weather, warfare, and time? While parts have been uncovered, segments of Roman paving and ancient watchtowers, many sections lie beneath modern highways, cities, or fields, forgotten by time. The Way of the Sea was not merely a road. It was a passage of power, prophecy, and passage. And though the sands have reclaimed much, echoes of its journey still stir beneath the surface, waiting to be retraced. Winding through arid deserts, jagged highlands, and ancient cities now half swallowed by sand, the frankincense trail once carried the scent of the sacred across 3 continents. This ancient trade route, active for over 1,000 years, connected the incense-producing regions of southern Arabia, particularly present-day Oman and Yemen, to the markets of the Levant, Egypt, Mesopotamia, and even Rome. At its height, the trail stretched over 2,000 kilometers, moving precious cargoes of frankincense and myrrh, resins more valuable than gold, burned in temples, tombs, and imperial courts. Caravans of thousands of camels crossed this route, stopping at fortified way stations and thriving cities like Shabwa, Marib, and Ubar, often called the Atlantis of the sands. The journey was perilous, through blistering heat, bandit territory, and waterless stretches where only the experienced could survive. But not all of the frankincense trail has been found. Where exactly was Ubar? Was it truly a lost incense city, or a mythical amalgam of many? Why do Roman texts mention incense sources beyond Arabia, sources still unidentified today? And what became of the trade when maritime routes rose to dominance? Modern archaeologists use satellite imagery to uncover faint caravan paths etched into the desert, and ancient inscriptions still surface, naming kings and gods once enriched by this invisible smoke. The frankincense trail was more than commerce. It was ritual, diplomacy, and belief, distilled into a fragrance that once perfumed the ancient world. And though the caravans are gone, the desert still remembers. Across the vast, blistering reaches of the Sahara, a path was carved not by wheels or empire, but by the steady, rhythmic steps of camel caravans. Known as the 40 Days Road, or Darb el Arbin, this ancient route defied the desert. For centuries, it served as a critical artery between sub-Saharan Africa and the Nile Valley. Stretching from the markets of Darfur in western Sudan to the heart of Egypt at Asiut, the journey took approximately 40 days, hence the name. Along this line, merchants transported gold, ivory, ostrich feathers, slaves, and gum arabic, while salt and grain moved in the opposite direction. Unlike maritime trade routes, Darb el Arbin required precise knowledge of hidden wells, wind patterns, and the unforgiving rhythms of the sand. Way stations, some now lost, were spaced just closely enough to keep life alive. It was a lifeline not only for goods, but for cultural exchange between the African interior and the Mediterranean world. And yet, so much of its path remains uncertain. Where did the earliest version of this road begin? Were there alternate tracks used during times of tribal conflict or drought? And what settlements flourished along its edges, now reduced to ruins or erased entirely by the desert wind? Though satellite surveys and oral histories have begun to piece together its outline, the 40 Days Road still holds secrets. It was more than a trade route, it was survival carved into silence. And its ghost still lingers, beneath the dust, between the dunes. On the shores of the Persian Gulf, where little now remains but sand and speculation, once stood the powerful mercantile city of Gera, a forgotten link in one of antiquity's most lucrative trade corridors. Founded by Chaldean exiles or Arabian tribes, depending on the source, Gera thrived between the 7th and 3rd centuries BCE as a major hub for incense, spices, pearls, and precious stones. It sat at the crossroads of the Arabian Peninsula's overland caravan trails and the maritime routes of the Persian Gulf and Indian Ocean, becoming a gatekeeper of goods traveling from India and southern Arabia to Mesopotamia and the Levant. The trade route of Gera connected interior incense-producing regions like Hadramaut and Cataban with Mesopotamian cities, such as Babylon and Ur, bypassing long, treacherous desert routes by embracing both land and sea. Gera's wealth was legendary. Its buildings were said to be made of stone and mortar, in stark contrast to the mud-brick cities of its neighbors. And yet, the city vanished. Its exact location remains uncertain, possibly beneath the sands of modern-day eastern Saudi Arabia or near the island of Failaka. Archaeological evidence is sparse, its ruins elusive, and its records fragmentary. Why did a city of such wealth and strategic power disappear so completely from the historical record? Some say shifting trade winds ended its reign. Others suspect conquest or slow decline erased by time. The trade route of Gera was a golden thread in the tapestry of ancient commerce. And somewhere, beneath the heat and silence of the Gulf Coast, its legacy still waits to be unearthed. In the shadow of the Nile's temples, amid walls etched with ships, trees, and foreign faces, lies the story of a route both revered and lost to time. The trade route of Punt remains one of ancient Egypt's greatest enigmas. For centuries, Egyptian expeditions sailed southward to a mysterious land they called Punt, a place of gold, ebony, myrrh, live baboons, and incense trees. From the Old Kingdom to the New, pharaohs chronicled their voyages to Punt with pride, none more vividly than Queen Hatshepsut, whose mortuary temple depicts a full-scale seaborne mission returning with treasures and exotic flora. But where exactly was Punt? And how did the Egyptians reach it? The trade route of Punt likely began along the Nile, crossing through wadis or desert trails to Red Sea ports, now lost or buried, such as Mersa Gawasis. From there, ships crafted from imported cedar and local acacia may have sailed along the African coast, perhaps as far as Eritrea or Somalia. Yet the trail grows cold beyond the shoreline. No Puntite records have ever been found. No harbor ruins unearthed. And despite modern tools, like isotope analysis of mummified baboons pointing toward Eritrea, no consensus exists on the full extent of the route or the civilization it connected to. The trade route of Punt was more than commerce. It was a sacred link between worlds, wrapped in myth and secrecy. And as long as the land of Punt remains unconfirmed, so too does the path that led there.